Okay, Zeus sleeps with everyone, but in Greek myth, it's never haha, horny god. It's the same move every time. There's a barrier, so Zeus cheats it with a disguise, a cloud, a stolen identity, a swan. He gets past what's off limits. But the myths don't stop at sex. That's where the plot begins. This isn't romance, it's an engine. So what are these myths actually setting in motion? Alright, let's start with Io. She's a priestess of Hera, Zeus's wife, the goddess of marriage. So yeah, this is not going to be cute. Here's the setup. Zeus wants Io, and immediately the myth gives him a problem. Not just will Io agree, a bigger problem. Hera exists. And Io isn't just some random girl in a field. She's in Hera's space, Hera's temple, Hera's rules. This isn't a personal problem for Zeus, it's a system problem. If Zeus just shows up as Zeus and does whatever he wants, the whole thing breaks. If he can just do that, what are rules even for? So the myth makes some room for him. In some versions, Io starts getting these dreams that pull her towards Zeus before she even understands what's happening. Her father panics, runs to oracles, and the message comes back like a threat. Send her away, or your whole house gets wiped. Thunderbolt style. That's the first tell. The myth is already pushing her out of protection. And then Zeus makes his move. Not a conversation, not a romance, a cover. Io's out in the open, outside the city, away from the safety of the temple. And a dark cloud drops over the place like someone threw a blanket over daylight. And under that cover, Zeus takes what he wants. And then immediately Hera shows up, because of course she does. So Zeus improvises. He turns Io into a white cow. And just sit with that for a second. Because that's not just magic. That's a person turned into something that can't testify, a life that can't even say its own name. And then Zeus tries to play it off like a gift, like, wow, crazy, I found this beautiful cow. For you, Hera. And the weird thing is, the myth still isn't finished. Now, hold that shape in your head, because Io is not a one-off. You see the same move again and again. Leda, Queen of Sparta, married, high status, off limits in every way that matters. So Zeus doesn't arrive as Zeus, he comes as a swan, and the myth treats it like a violation, not a love scene. Callisto, sworn to Artemis, the virgin hunt goddess. Callisto is also supposed to be off limits, so Zeus doesn't approach as himself. He uses Artemis's face, her voice, her authority, and he violates Callisto through that disguise. Danae, princess locked away by her father in a bronze chamber to block a prophecy. You know, regular myth stuff. So Zeus becomes something that ignores walls entirely, a golden shower. Damn, Zeus really is freaky. Anyway, different disguises, same logic. Because it's not just that he changes costumes, he changes what kind of thing he is, until the boundary stops applying. And none of these stories end with Zeus just getting what he wants. They keep going. Because these stories don't frame this like romance, they frame it like a mechanism. So if it's not just, haha, horny god, why do the myths keep doing this? What are they trying to build out of it? If you like myth breakdowns like this, subscribe, it helps me keep making them. Here's the thing Act 1 only hinted at. These myths don't treat the affair as the event, they treat it like the trigger. And if you want to see that clearly, we need to go back to Io, not the Zeus cloud moment, but what the myth does after. Because the second Zeus forces the encounter, the myth doesn't go quiet, it goes operational. Cover up, containment, damage control. Io gets turned into a cow not as some random myth magic, but as a way to make the situation barely fit inside a universe that still wants to pretend it has rules. But Hera senses something's off. The myth locks Io down, and then it turns her life into a long consequence spiral, being watched, chased, left to wander endlessly, a whole nightmare. And just so you feel what that means, imagine being trapped in an animal body, unable to explain yourself, while a guard is literally there to make sure you never get to rest. Everywhere you go, someone is still controlling your body. It's like the myth is saying, once Zeus touches your life stops being yours. But I don't want to get stuck in the suffering tour, because that's not what Act 2 is about. So let's skip ahead, because the myth refuses to let Io's punishment be the ending. It keeps dragging the story forward until it reaches a completely different kind of conclusion. Not emotional closure, not justice, not healing, but it ends like paperwork. Io ends up in Egypt. Zeus restores her human form. But the myth insists on one last thing: a child. A child of Zeus and Io, Epaphus. And this is where we can finally name what Act 2 is about. Because the child isn't just, and then Io had a kid. The child is the point where the myth stops being private and becomes public. The affair produces something the world can use: a claim. Okay, vocabulary moment, because this is the word that's going to carry this whole act. When I say claim, I mean a reason you can point to later, like a receipt, and say, this is why my family matters. This is why we get to rule. This is why we belong here. This is why our power isn't random. Not a claim like a complaint, a claim to legitimacy. And Epaphus is that kind of object, a receipt you can carry around, which means the story stops being private. Because once he exists, the myth starts doing that myth thing where we can hit fast forward. One birth becomes a family line. That line becomes a dynasty. Dynasties become rival claims. And suddenly, you're not talking about Zeus did something awful. You're talking about who gets to inherit power. This is the part people tend to skip over because it looks like genealogy trivia. But it's actually the mechanism. Because in the ancient world, a family tree isn't a fun chart, it's a legal argument. Io's descendants become kings and founders, and the myth starts treating divine ancestry like paperwork that travels. And I don't mean that metaphorically. There's literally a tragedy that runs on this logic. In Aeschylus' Suppliants, Io's descendants, the Danaids, show up in Argos, her home city, as refugees. And they don't plead like random outsiders, they make an argument. They basically say, we're not strangers, we're from here, our bloodline goes back to Io. That means this land is part of our myth. You owe us protection. That's what this myth infrastructure looks like when it hits the ground. Ancestry as a lever. So here's the upgrade to what I said in Act 1. The affairs aren't written as romance. They're written like a factory. They produce the thing that can keep working long after Zeus leaves the scene. A child becomes a claim becomes a right becomes power. And now the really important part. Io isn't just one example of this. Io is a root system, because her myth doesn't just produce a child, it produces a whole Argive dynasty machine, the kind that keeps spitting out royal houses and consequences. So when we jump from Io to later myths, it's not random myth hopping, it's following the same pipeline forward. Generations later after Io, you get Danae, the locked-up princess that got golden showered by Zeus. She gives birth to Perseus. Yes, the Medusa-slaying Perseus. And I know some of you have caught on by now. Greek mythology is full of incest. So I guess you could say Olympus is a lot like Alabama. Or is Alabama a lot like Olympus? Anyway, but Perseus doesn't just stay a cool guy with a sword. He becomes another node in the same structure. A founder, a royal ancestor, another name you can point to later and go, see, this line matters. And that's where we land on Alcmene. Because Alcmene isn't just another woman Zeus sleeps with. She's Perseus' descendant. The myth has already done the paperwork on her. Her children matter by default. So when Zeus shows up here, this isn't a new affair. This is the machine running at peak efficiency. Because what it's trying to produce is not subtle. It's Heracles, the biggest hero project Greek myth ever launches. Alcmene is married to Amphitryon, legitimate husband, legitimate household, legitimate line. And Zeus doesn't show up as an animal. He doesn't show up as weather. He does something colder. He takes Amphitryon's form, not just to get access, but to steal legitimacy. Zeus tricking Callisto was him borrowing Artemis's identity to get past a boundary. This is Zeus doing it again, except now he's doing it to create a child who comes pre-stamped with two kinds of authority. Because look at what that disguise does. On the outside, it's a normal marriage encounter. It fits the rules, it fits the household, it fits the myth a city can tell itself without choking on it. And underneath it, it's Zeus. It's divine paternity. It's the highest stamp in the system. So the kid that comes out of this isn't just Zeus's son. He's a child you can read two ways at once. Mortal legitimacy, born into the right house, and divine legitimacy, fathered by the top god. This is not a romance story. It's not seduction. It's manufacturing. And the myths basically wink at you to make sure you don't miss what just happened, because Zeus doesn't even keep this quiet. There's a moment in Homer's Iliad where Zeus is basically like, a descendant of my blood is being born today, and he's going to rule. That's not a love confession. That's a public declaration of authority. So at this point, the myth has trained you to expect one outcome. If Zeus just engineered the ultimate hero, a hero with the best legitimacy paperwork imaginable, then Heracles should be protected, he should be carried, he should be untouchable. And instead, his life is a catastrophe. Not in a vague heroes suffer way, in a why does the universe punish him for existing way? Which is where this act ends. Because now the question isn't what do these affairs produce? We answer that. They produce legitimacy, they produce heirs, they produce claims. Now the question is, if divine parentage is the ultimate stamp of legitimacy, why does it come with a price that ruins the person it's stamped onto? Why does the system that manufactures greatness also manufacture suffering? So you thought Zeus's affairs didn't have a price. Meet the bill, Hera. And no, this isn't just jealousy. This is legitimacy with teeth. A lot of modern retellings turn her into the angry wife. Petty, irrational, just insecure. But in the myths, Hera is bigger than a mood. She's the rule book. She is the goddess of marriage and the household. Basically, the official family, the official line, who belongs inside it and who doesn't. So when Zeus starts producing children outside the official household, Hera is the part of the system that says, cool, now pay. And remember that moment I mentioned last act? That weird scene where Zeus basically announces his plan out loud. The day Heracles is born, Zeus makes a public proclamation. A child of my blood, born today, will rule. That's not a love confession. That's a dynasty announcement. A stamp on the mortal world. But Hera hears the claim, and she moves to undercut it. Not with screaming, with procedure. Zeus speaks like a god. Hera listens like a lawyer, and you already know where this is going. He hears, my son. She hears the wording. She gets Zeus to swear an unbreakable oath, but the wording shifts, just slightly. Zeus thinks he's locking kingship onto his direct son. Hera's version makes it apply to any descendant of Zeus born that day. Trap set. Then she delays Alcmene's labor just long enough for Eurystheus, a descendant of Zeus but not Zeus's son, to be born first. So the prophecy doesn't vanish, it gets reassigned, and Heracles loses the kingship before he even takes his first breath. Kingship gone, future rewritten, not a crown, a leash. Because now Heracles is tied to Eurystheus. Eurystheus becomes the king. Heracles becomes the tool. And this is where the Heracles story people actually know kicks in. The 12 labors. If you heard the phrase but never really knew what it meant, it's simple. Eurystheus gives him 12 jobs that are designed to crush Heracles. Some are monster fights, like a lion you can't stab, or a hydra that grows heads back. Some are go fetch this thing from the edge of the world. And the point isn't just adventure, the point is proof. Because like we said last act, a divine birth gives you a claim, but a claim doesn't automatically become reality. Reality is what survives the test. So look at what the system demands from him. Take one of the strangest labors, cleaning the Eugenian stables. No monster, no glory, just filth. The greatest hero alive is ordered to shovel out decades of dung from thousands of cattle in one day. It's designed to shrink him, to turn Zeus's great hero project into a worker knee-deep in shit. A normal man would fail. A regular hero might try to shovel really fast, but Heracles doesn't shovel. He looks up, he sees the landscape, he sees 2 rivers nearby, and he redirects them straight through the stables. 30 years of filth gets washed out in one afternoon. That's the system in one image. Humiliation as the assignment, divine power as the solution. Proof produced in public. So tell me again this is just Hera's jealousy, because what Hera is doing here isn't random cruelty, it's enforcement. She's the force that turns born special into proven special. In these stories, you don't inherit power, you prove it in pain, because that's how systems make claims real. Even his name carries it. Heracles in Greek means the glory of Hera. That's not just irony, that's design. His fame gets forged through the pressure she applies. And here's the nastier part. Even proof doesn't buy peace, because in one famous version, Euripides' Heracles, after he's built alive, after he has a home and a wife and children, Hera still doesn't let it settle. She sends madness, and the hero, the protector, suddenly sees his own children as enemies in the one place that's supposed to be safe, his own house. He kills them. He kills his wife, Megara. Then he wakes up, covered in his family's blood, life shattered. And if you step back, you see the real shape of the bill. The suffering doesn't stay contained inside one punishment. It spreads. It hits the women, it hits the children, it hits whoever Zeus pulled into the story. And if you want the earlier version of that pattern, look at Io and notice who doesn't pay? Zeus. He makes the claim, he gets the legacy, and other people absorb the cost. So yeah, this isn't romance, it's infrastructure, claim through birth, proof through suffering. That's the machine. But here's the problem. Up to now, we've been inside the myth, watching the gears turn. We've been asking, how does the machine work? Now we have to ask the question that actually explains why these stories survive. Why would human beings keep telling myths built like this? Why keep returning to Zeus again and again? What is Zeus doing for people telling the story? Because until we answer that, we still don't have the full picture. So far, we've been watching Zeus work inside myth, producing claims, testing them, making them feel real. Now I want to show you the same logic outside myth, real people using Zeus as a tool. Picture this, it's 39 BCE. You live in Stratonikeia, a Greek city in Caria, modern-day Turkey, and war shows up at your door. A Roman commander named Quintus Labienus is staring through the region, and your city is not winning that fight. Not even close. So people do the only thing that makes sense. They run. Not to an army, not to another city, to a sanctuary, a sacred mountain site outside the town where Zeus is worshipped. And in the ancient world, a sanctuary isn't just a temple, it's supposed to be a safe zone, a place protected because it belongs to a god. But now they're trapped. Labienus surrounds the mountain. They can't break out, they can't bargain from strength. Your walls don't matter, your laws don't matter. If Rome wants you gone, you're gone. And then the sky breaks open. Later, an inscription is carved onto the sanctuary walls describing what happened next. For 3 days and 3 nights, it says Zeus unleashes storms, hail, and fire, weather so violent it feels like the universe picked a side. And inside that chaos, the text describes terrifying apparitions, phantom forces in the fog, enough to panic the attackers. The siege collapses. The city survives. They call it an epiphany, meaning Zeus showed up, not metaphorically, more like we were about to die and then reality intervened. Now, here's the twist. The miracle isn't the ending. What matters is what they do after the miracle. Because they don't treat this like a cute story, they treat it like a resource. First, they rename the god. Before this, he's worshipped as Zeus Karios, basically Zeus of Caria. After the rescue, they start calling him Zeus Panamaros, Zeus of Panamara, the mountain where it happened. That name is a claim. This isn't just a Zeus, this is the Zeus who saved us. Second, they build a festival around it, the Panamareia. And it's not private. They parade Zeus's statue from the mountain sanctuary down into the city, on a sacred road, year after year. So the rescue stops being a memory and becomes a public ritual the whole city keeps rewatching. That's proof turned into tradition. Third, they mint coins. They stamp their money with Zeus as a rider god, Zeus on horseback, echoing that procession. So every transaction repeats the message. You buy bread, Zeus. You pay tax, Zeus. You hold the coin and it's right there in the metal. This city is backed. You can't escape the branding. And then they do the biggest move of all. They take the story to Rome. They send an embassy to the Roman Senate and use the rescue story to ask Rome for a cilia. Basically, you legally can't touch the sanctuary. And Rome says yes, which is wild because now the miracle has paperwork. The miracle turns into a status upgrade you can enforce. So let's be brutally clear about what just happened. A city almost gets erased, but it survives. And then it turns survival into leverage. A new name, a new festival, new coins, a legal upgrade from Rome. That's not belief, that's strategy. That's a community taking something fragile, its safety, its status, its right to exist, and trying to bolt it onto something that feels unarguable. And that's where Zeus comes in. Because Zeus wasn't just entertaining in myths, he was useful in life. You know how most power is just people agreeing it counts? Kings, laws, borders, citizenship. None of it exists in nature. It exists because people collectively act like it matters. Agreements crack under fear, under war, under anyone stronger. So you need a way to say, this isn't just our opinion, this isn't just our city, this isn't just our rule, this counts. And Greek myth trains you to see Zeus as exactly that kind of this counts power. Not just the strongest god, the one who holds order together, distributing status, settling disputes, keeping the system standing. So when real communities wanted their own fragile projects to feel real, they stamped them with Zeus. And you can see the same logic even more clearly in the way Greeks named him. Because Greeks didn't just say Zeus like it was one single fixed thing. They'd attach a specific label to Zeus, a kind of job title, depending on what they needed from him. Those labels are called epithets, and the simplest way to understand an epithet is, it's Zeus, but for this specific problem. So if you're worried your city will fall apart, you call on Zeus Poleus, Zeus of the city. If you're worried about strangers, because hospitality is the thin line between civilization and chaos, that's Zeus Xenios. If you need rescue in a crisis, that's Zeus Soter, Zeus the Savior. Different fears, same move. You take the human problem and attach it to the name that makes it feel like more than a human agreement. So when you ask, why would people keep telling Zeus stories built like this is why. Because these myths didn't just entertain people, they trained people how to think about legitimacy. So yeah, Zeus slept with a lot of people in Greek myth. It sounds like gossip, like the gods were just messy. But the myths don't treat it as gossip, they treat it like construction. A Zeus affair isn't a love story, it's a trigger that produces a receipt, a claim someone can cash later. Then it gets tested. Then someone else pays. Because in these myths, Zeus doesn't just represent power, he represents the logic of power. It gets made through bodies, it gets defended through suffering, and then it gets stamped into names, festivals, coins, laws, until it feels like reality itself. So yeah, Zeus is the stamp of legitimacy. But the stamp isn't truth, it's what makes everyone else treat something as official, like a seal pressed into wax. So these myths aren't only about what the Greeks believed, they're about what they were afraid of. That everything human, your city, your family, your status, your safety can collapse overnight, unless something bigger is holding it up. And that's why Zeus keeps showing up. Not because he's romantic, not because he's relatable, not because he's funny, because he's useful. So the next time you see Zeus show up in the myth, this guy sneaking, declaring, stamping someone's life, don't ask why is he like this, ask the scarier question. What does a society need to be afraid of for this kind of god to feel necessary? And once you start seeing that, you start seeing Zeus everywhere. Not on Olympus, in the places where people are trying to make fragile things feel unbreakable. And if you want another video, I asked Zeus of the algorithm to recommend something you'll like.